I'll be speaking something about structured interview as a technique of data collection. The basic learning outcomes which I expect from this session are that after the session, the participant research scholars will define the term interview, enlist the functions of interview as a technique of data collection, state the different types of interviews, define the term structured interview and explain how it can be used as a technique of data collection, narrate the steps of conducting a structured interview, elaborate the skills required for conducting a structured interview, tell the merits, limitations, and precautions to be taken while conducting the structured interview, and describe how the information collected through a structured interview can be analyzed. So I expect that after the end of the session, each participant questions himself on all these points and tell me whether they would be able to do it, because that would be the real success of the session. Now let me begin with the term interview itself and the definition of the term. If you look at these definitions, you will come to know that there are certain important features of an interview. The first important thing is that the interview is something between two or more persons. The second important feature is that it is in a face-to-face situation. And the third important thing is that there is a discussion on certain topic or certain content which has been selected. So then what are the different things which are discussed in an interview? It could be with respect to the background. Say for example, what are the educational qualifications, what is the age, what is the nationality, etc. of the interviewee. It could also be related with the emotions of the interviewee, like when do you feel angry, or how do you express your anger, some questions of these on these lines. It could also be on the thoughts of the person, like what are your thoughts on higher education? What do you think about the present system of higher education? It could also be on the different attitudes of the people. For example, what is your attitude towards education of girls? It could also be about the likes and dislikes of the person. For example, very simple questions like what food do you like, or what kind of dress do you like, or which movie star is your favorite. So questions of these kinds. Interview could also question the various experiences which the individual has had. Say for example, the participants of this particular lecture series. So I could ask a question for when I'm interviewing them, like what were your experiences? How do you really experience this virtual interaction with you with respect to the different tools of data collection? So there I'm focusing on the experiences which you have had. It could also be related to the motives of an individual. For this participant group, I could ask, why do you want to do PhD? What is the motive behind doing PhD? So questions of this kind. There could be simple questions like even the opinion of the participants or opinion of the interviewee. Say, for example, what are your views on online education? So what is your opinion about online education? So there are different kinds of questions which can be asked in an interview. One important thing is that when we are talking of questions, we are definitely reminded of the other tool of data collection, which is the questionnaire. But interview and questionnaire are different. The most important difference is that in an interview, you have a face-to-face situation. That means the interviewer or the researcher and the person whom he is interviewing come face to face with each other, which is not possible necessarily when you use a questionnaire. The other important thing is that the interviewer himself writes down the responses of the interviewee. So a basic difference over here is that he would be writing all those points which he wants to actually get the answers about. Another important thing is that the clarifications regarding the questions are possible, because suppose you ask a question and the interviewee is not able to understand, he could ask for the clarification of the words which are there. That is not possible when you use a questionnaire. Another important thing is, in an interview, you can use this particular technique for any kind of an individual. He may be an illiterate person, he or she may be a very small child, or a person coming from rural area who is not able to write in the language which you want him to write. But there are limitations when you think of a questionnaire, because it can be used for literate people. An important feature of interview is, which is more, I would say, beneficial if you consider it in the context of a questionnaire, is that the observation of the respondent is possible, and that behavior, the body language also can give you a number of inputs regarding the responses, the additional responses. And because you can also, since it's face-to-face, you can also record the interview which is going on, so that you can later on also refer to it and note down the responses. And a most important feature is that when you have decided to take an interview, you are going to get a better response, because I think all of us have experienced this, that when we think of a questionnaire, if we say around 50 people, I think majority of us have had this experience that around 20, 25, maybe 50%, in a very rare case, you would get 30 questionnaires back, which are duly and completely filled in. So that is one of the important limitations of a questionnaire, and why interview also needs to be used when we are conducting research. So what are the basic functions of an interview? Two main functions. One is the descriptive functions. Say, for example, you ask a question, what are your duties as a supervisor of a school? Now here what you are asking the person to do is describe his duties. So it is a kind of a description which you are going to get. That is one function of an interview. You can have another function of an interview, which is the exploratory function. For example, what is your opinion regarding the online education? Now, what here you are trying to do is you are trying to explore this concept of online education from various perspectives. Suppose you are asking this question, you can ask it from the point of view of teachers, you can ask it from the point of view of parents, you can ask it from the point of the student himself, you can ask it from the point of view of the infrastructure. So you will realize that you are trying to explore the various things in the perspective of online education. So these are the two main functions of an interview. Now, what are the different types of interview? Basically, interviews are classified under these main heads. The first is according to the objective or the purpose. What is the purpose behind conducting the interview? For example, if you are talking of a diagnostic interview, the purpose is diagnosing the problems of the individual. So that is the objective. So a diagnostic interview is an example of an interview which is classified according to the objective or the purpose. You can also have interviews on the basis of their formality, whether it is a formal interview, whether it is an informal interview. Interview conducted for selection of students for the PhD could be an example of the formal interview. Also on the basis of number of respondents, how much respondents are there when you are conducting the interview. So that is also one way of classifying the interviews. The methodology of conducting the interview, the type of information you want to collect, like quantitative or qualitative, and the nature of contact or connect. Now, these are the different ways in which it can be classified. Let us look at a few examples. Now, the structured or the semi-structured or the unstructured interviews. The structured interviews we will be talking about in detail in due course. Now, these are examples which are classified on the basis of the methodology of conducting the information. Because here, the method is, for example, if we take the structured interview, the methodology is pre-decided. Everything is pre-decided. So this classification is based on methodology. If we look at the diagnostic interview, as I mentioned earlier, it is an example of the interview classified on the objective or purpose. You have individual and group interviews. Now, I hope you understand that this is an example of an interview classified on the basis of number of respondents. Then qualitative and quantitative interview. This is based on the type of data which you want to collect through the interview. You also have formal and informal interviews. I've given you an example of the formal interview. An informal informal interview can be where, say, for example, you see the different kinds of interviews which are on the television, people on the road, and they're just asking questions. So, an example of an informal interview. Authoritarian interview is where the interviewer is very, very dominant. So, I would say a structured interview and authoritarian interview have many things in common. You could also have a biographical interview. I want you to guess what kind of interview is it. At the end of the session, I would definitely ask you a question on it. Focused group interview, that is one example, and you will be listening to it in the next session. You also have elite interviews. So this refers to the different experts whom you interview on the basis of or in the context of a particular subject. You have many such interviews even on television where you have this panel discussion kind of thing, where experts from the field come and each one voices their opinion with respect to the particular issue which is being discussed. And you could also have a telephonic interview, which is an example of the classification based on the type of contact. Now remember, telephonic conversation in such kind of an interview, you may not have a face-to-face contact, but now with the advance of technology, if you use the WhatsApp call or if you are interviewing in this manner, in the way in which we are interacting, you could also have that face-to-face kind of effect. Now let us come to what is a structured interview. If you look at the definition of structured interview, from that you will realize that this interview is something which is done in a controlled manner, in a controlled situation, where you have a predetermined set of questions. The questions are entirely decided beforehand. No question is added later on. And these questions, the number of questions is decided, the sequence of questions is decided, and it is conducted exactly in the manner in which it has been decided, pre-decided, I would say, or predetermined. So you will realize that this is a very, very kind of a controlled kind of a situation. You would say then that in which kind of research can you use this structured interview? If you look carefully, you will find that it is useful in majority of the different types of researches. For example, it can be used for quantitative research, say for example in quantitative surveys. So you have a set of questions with respect to a product or a program which you have designed, and then you can have questions which say yes, no, or agree, don't agree, strongly agree, such kind of questions which are asked in an interview. So that could give you the quantitative data, and the questions would be entirely closed-ended kind of questions. You could also use it to some extent in qualitative research, though not in many of the qualitative researches, but yes, to some extent, in certain qualitative researches. Now, for example, you are conducting interviews in accredited colleges with A grade, and you are trying to find out what are the different programs they have organized for their quality improvement. So there you would have a definite set of questions, like which program have you organized? What were the objectives of these programs? What was the methodology for? So these set of questions would be same for each and every program, for each and every college. The kind of data you would be collecting would be definitely qualitative, but the structured interview would be useful. You can use it in descriptive research, as I mentioned earlier. You could use it in a case study to a very, very less extent, but yes, even in historical research. For example, you are trying to validate a particular source which you have got, the authenticity of that source. So if you're interviewing 4 or 5 people with respect to the authenticity of that document maybe, or the source which you have got, the set of questions would be same because the parameters for authenticity would have been pre-decided by you. You can even use a structured interview in experimental research. You have conducted a program, you want to find out the opinion of participants regarding that program. So you could have a structured interview of a few of the participants individually, or you could, what I would say, in pairs or something of that kind, but the set of questions again would be pre-decided. So you will realize that yes, structured interview is a highly controlled kind of interview, but it can be used in majority of the types of researches. Now, let me look at some of the merits, or I would say why we need to use structured interviews. The first and the foremost reason is that it is a standardized kind of an interview. So you get the definite kind of information which is absolutely relevant to the kind of research you're doing. The second important reason is that it is conducted in a specific, systematic, and a precise manner. So what I would say is that there is a definite set of questions, there is a definite sequence of questions, and a definite time limit which is there, because you are going to expect answers only in the light of the question which you have asked. You are not going to digress towards any other kind of information. Then there is less possibility of misinterpretation of the questions. As I've already mentioned, since you are going to have a face-to-face interaction, you will be able to clarify the doubt if at all there is any, and avoid this misinterpretation. Then let us go further. The most important thing is it is a primary source of data, because you are directly interviewing the person who is involved and who is concerned with that particular topic. So it becomes a primary source of data. Then, as I mentioned earlier, you can collect both qualitative and quantitative information from a structured interview, and you can analyze it also qualitatively and quantitatively. We will be looking at this point in detail a little later. Now, also, as I said, you will require less time as compared to unstructured interview. Because what happens in an unstructured interview is that many new questions could be added, and then maybe the time which has been allotted or the time which is available is less, and some of the important questions which you had actually decided to ask are not asked. So your time, the number of questions, the way you are going to ask the questions, all these things are fixed, and hence in the predetermined time you are able to conduct this particular interview. Now, what type of questions can you ask? You can ask both kinds of questions, but remember, structured interview generally includes closed-ended questions, generally. But you can also have open-ended questions if it is suitable for your particular topic. As I gave you an example of, say, the programs which are conducted for quality enhancement. So the set of questions would be same. There you would be getting open-ended question, open-ended answers also, different kind of descriptive answers. And that is where open-ended questions could be asked in a structured interview. Now, what are the steps to conduct a structured interview? First and foremost, when you start to design the interview, determine what information you want to collect. Look at your objective. What is your objective? In the context of the objective, what are the different things you want to conduct? Let us take that example once again. For example, you are trying to find out what are the different programs which are conducted by A-grade colleges for quality enhancement of the college or of the institution. Now, if this is my basic objective, what could be the sub-objectives? Say, for example, they could be, what are the different programs? For whom are they conducted? In what manner are they conducted? What is the duration of the program? Who are the different resource persons who are invited? What kind of outcomes do they expect? What kind of feedback they have got? These are a few things which could become your sub-objectives and the information which you want to collect. So first, when you decide your objective, enlist what could be the sub-objectives or the detailed information which you want. Now, after this, after you have decided this, decide what would be the sample or the informants. On the basis of that, then you design or you structure the interview questions. So write down the questions. And as is our usual procedure, pilot test them and revise them if necessary. Now, this can be done by actually administering the interview for 1 or 2 cases, or you could show it to experts and take a content validity of the questions. So you have different ways of conducting the pilot test and revising the questions. So do that and then conduct the actual interview. Now, when you are conducting the actual interview, remember there are 3 important aspects to conducting the actual interviews. First is I would say pre-preparation of the interview. So the person whom you are going to interview, the interviewee, you need to take his or her time in advance. You have to state the purpose of the interview. You have to state the approximate time you would require. And you have to prepare yourself also with the sequence of the questions, with the duration which you want to manage, the time duration which you want to manage, and go in a well-prepared manner. That is pre-interview preparation. During the interview, you have to stick to the time, you have to stick to the questions, you have to stick to the sequence of the questions, but remember at the same time, it should not become a totally authoritarian kind of an interview. If there is any misinterpretation, clarify the doubt, give some motivating remarks, and encourage the person to speak more than what you would speak. So these are some of the things which you have to consider when you conduct the actual interview. And after the interview, remember to thank the person whom you have interviewed for their valuable opinions and time. I think you can also then later send a letter of thanks or a letter of appreciation for their cooperation. This is how you are actually going to conduct the interviews. Now comes the part where you are going to analyze the interview, because you are going to take it forward in your research. So for that, you have to transcribe the answers. This is a very, very difficult task and a time-consuming task, because you have to look at each and every answer in detail, each and every word in detail, and then identify, find out, locate the important points in the answers of all the persons whom you have interviewed. Then you will have to analyze the answers, bring together all the answers, look at the answers, compare them, classify them, all these things, and then enlist your findings and derive conclusions. Many times you will realize that structured interview can be used as a major tool, a major technique in your research, or you can also use it as a supportive technique for gathering supportive data. How are you going to analyze the data? Now, this you will realize that in a structured interview, if you have the quantitative data, like as I mentioned earlier, yes, no, or agree, don't agree, such kind of questions, it is not very difficult to analyze the data. You can directly go to the percentage and then use your further statistics which you want to use. Now, if it is a qualitative kind of an interview, if you are collecting qualitative information, how are you going to analyze? There are two different ways. One is the thematic analysis and one is the content analysis. I am going to briefly explain these two. Remember, the explanation is just a supportive kind of a thing. You will have to look at the different references which I have given at the end of my presentation for a detailed clarification of the same. I had conducted a structured interview after the sessions on team teaching were conducted for the pre-service teachers. The question was, state any one benefit of team teaching. Now, when this question is asked, you will understand that the student's response has been restricted to just giving one benefit, okay? The response to 15 pre-service teachers. Remember, interviews are done in a limited number. It is not like a big survey kind of a thing where you have hundreds of interviews or a number of interviews. So around 15 to 20 interviews are generally conducted. That number is also quite a number. So one of the questions was, state any one benefit of team teaching. Now these are the different responses which were given by the students. I looked at their answers and I tried to group them. Here, for your understanding, I have used different font color. So I have tried to group them in such a way where I found certain similarities with respect to their responses. After I had grouped them, I enlisted them together and gave them a small heading. For example, the responses, we could prepare better, a detailed study of the topic was possible, or we could collect a lot of information. We looked at the topic from different perspectives and we were able to develop the lesson plan in a better way. All these talk about actually the pre-teaching session. So about how to plan the session. And that is why I have given it a heading as planning of the session. There were responses like implement creative ideas during teaching, presented the content in different ways, used a variety of teaching aids, and we could cater to many students in the classroom. So now these responses are talking about the actual teaching session which was conducted. So these were the benefits related to the teaching session or during the teaching session. There were responses like we discussed together and shared ideas. We understood each other's strengths and weaknesses. We were able to distribute the work and we developed a team spirit. All these talk about the benefits in the context of working in a team. So I have given it the heading as working in a team or teamwork. That could also be given. And a few of them also mentioned about it improved our presentation skills. It developed our confidence. So it has helped them in a personal way also. So developing personal skills. What I did, so again I repeat, what I did was I looked at all the responses. I first classified them together based on the similarities which I could see, and then I gave them a small heading kind of a thing. What I did was later on, I put it in a graph using frequency. So this is called as content analysis. What you do is, from those qualitative responses which you have got, you looked at the number of responses and you have given the numbers accordingly. Let me go back to the same slide. Planning of the session, I had got 5 different responses. So that is why in the graph I have put the number 5. For the next 2, I got 4 different responses. So I have put the number frequency 4 and 4. And for the last one, I got just 2 responses. So I have put the number 2. You could also put this in the form of percentage. So I've converted the number into percentage, and then I have put it in the form of a percentage using graph. This type of analysis is called as content analysis, where you are converting the qualitative data which you have got into a form of a number or numerical, in a numerical way. So this is content analysis. Now on the basis of this, I do my interpretation. So first I do an observation. I say that maximum number, this is just an example. You could use your own words for writing your observations or interpretation. So this is just an example. Maximum number of pre-service teachers have enlisted their benefits of team teaching in planning for teaching. This is followed by its usefulness in actual teaching in the classroom and teamwork. Less number of pre-service teachers have stated that it is useful for developing personal skills. And the interpretation which I give is, we can say that the pre-service teachers have found team teaching useful for them professionally as well as personally. Now, this is one way of analyzing, as I mentioned, the content analysis. Let us look at the other type of analysis which I mentioned for a structured interview, which is the thematic analysis. The question, I had conducted a structured interview for teacher educators, school teachers and pre-service teachers. That is the B.Ed students. And the question which I had asked was, why is professional development for teachers important? Their replies I have put below. The teacher educators gave responses like, to understand the needs of the customer, to realize how the needs of the customer can be satisfied, and to help in self-development. The school teachers gave responses like, to upgrade yourself and your pupils' learning, to identify the needs of the students, and to learn new developments in the field of education. The pre-service teachers gave responses like, to help to improve oneself, to empower one's own capabilities to cope up with the current standards or to cope up with the current needs of the students. I'm sure you're able to see the lines which have drawn below the words. Some of the lines are in red and some of the lines are in green. I think now from the previous slides, you must have realized why I have done that. Again, they are talking about some commonality between the responses. And I have again grouped these responses together. One is talking in the context of the student's needs. I have just written down those words once again here, the phrases. And the other is talking about self-improvement. So if you look at the responses of all these three, you will realize that the responses can be broadly classified under 2 main heads. One is the needs of the students and the other is improvement of one's own self. Here I have, what I do is, now what is the difference between the content analysis and the thematic analysis is, what I do is, I say now that the teacher educators, school educators and pre-service teachers all have said that professional development is important for customer needs and for self-development, or satisfaction of customer needs and self-development. I have not converted it into numbers, into frequencies or into any percentage. I keep the words as they are and I interpret. Now what I do over here is, we generally use the word discussion when we use qualitative analysis or the thematic analysis. And we say that, again, I'm telling you, you can use your own words. This is just given as an example of how you can write. So the common observation in the responses given by the teacher educators, school teachers, and pre-service teachers regarding the importance of professional development is the focus given on the aspects related to 1. Current education scenario from the view of satisfaction of customer needs, and 2. Focus on self-development. So we can say that all of them, that is the teacher educators, the school teachers, and the pre-service teachers, realize the importance of professional development for quality enhancements and excellence through self-improvement and customer satisfaction. This is how you go on describing. Now remember, here I have given you very, very few responses, very, very few examples for you to understand the process. Actual process of converting it into a thematic analysis or even a content analysis takes a lot of time, because as I said, your interviews are written in paragraph form. You have to identify those words. You have to classify those words and phrases, group them, omit them, rearrange them. All these things would be required. But this is the way you would generally use while doing analysis of the interview. Now I'm sure you must have realized that there are a lot of merits of structured interview. The first and the foremost merit is that the answers given by the respondents are comparable, because the questions are standardized, they are more objective, and they are more precise. It is also easier to analyze and interpret because you're not digressing from the information which you want. The answers are more reliable as respondents' own words are recorded by the person who is interviewing. Of course, there are a few limitations of a structured interview, like sometimes it may become very artificial because you have to stick to those questions. So you will ask one question, when you get the answer, you ask the second question. When you get the answer to the second question, you ask the third question. So it may become a slightly monotonous or slightly artificial. An important thing is that developing a set of structured questions brings limitations to the data collection in contrast to the unstructured interview. Because in an unstructured interview, you can add a few questions. You are not allowed to add questions in a structured interview. So maybe when you're conducting the interview, you realize that yes, there are a few areas which I have missed out when I made those set of questions, but you are not allowed to digress. So that is one limitation. Of course, any kind of interview, and so also a structured interview, is time consuming and costly. It requires skillful interviewers. You need to be very skillful if you yourself are going to be an interviewer. And as I mentioned earlier, when the questions are restricted, the responses also can be restricted, because you're going to say, no, my question is just this. I don't want you to go beyond that. So the responses also can get restricted. These are a few limitations of a structured interview. The most important precautions, I have mentioned a few earlier, but these three I feel are the most important precautions which you need to take. First is take prior appointment, mention the approximate time required for the interview, prepare well and have a very, very positive attitude when you go for the interview, and restrict yourself to asking only those questions which you have planned. You're not going to move away from the plan which you have designed. Now, these are a few of the selected references which I have used for making this presentation. I would definitely like you all to go through these references for better understanding, especially in the context of the analysis which I've given. I have mentioned it very, very briefly for you to understand the process. But remember, you will be requiring a great amount of time when you are going to actually do the analysis of the interviews. So one important suggestion would be that restrict the number of questions to 10 or 12 maximum, because then you would be able to really analyze them very, very effectively. It is going to be a very time consuming process for you. But yes, it will definitely add quality to your research. I once again wish you all the best for your research work and for all those specifically who are going to use interviews in their research. Thank you and all the best.